All right, welcome back to your favorite part of the week. That is the video going over the Odyssey. So we're going to pick back up from where we ended last week with the end of book 10. So let's review just the very end of book 10. Do you remember where the enchantress Circe sends Odysseus? Before he can go home, he has one more journey to make, one that sends ice through his veins and makes him worried and terrified. Let's review our map. She sends him. Let me make sure I got myself here. So we're starting out at 7, where Odysseus has been with Circe for a year. And before he can return home, she tells him to go to Tiresias in the land of the dead. He is told to descend to Hades to get advice on his journey home from the blind prophet Tiresias. And let's just notice for a second that here in the world of Greek mythology, death is a place you can visit, and she gives him directions. It's like turn left at this island and continue until you find this river. So I think that's just a little interesting to note. So in the land of the dead, Odysseus and his men make their journey there, and he calls out the spirits through sacrifices. He takes sheep and sacrifices them, and it's their dark, dark blood that begins to bring these shades or ghosts up. And this is really important. There are a lot of religious rituals in the epic, and we see a lot about Greek religion through the way that they treat their gods, the way that they perform these different rituals, and so that's no different here. And one of the tragic moments of the story is when Odysseus is surprised by the ghost of his mother, Anticlea. So when he left to go to war, however many years ago, I think at this point we're at like 13 years ago, his mother was alive, and so he's shocked to see her ghost here among the other ghosts of the dead. And so we learn eventually that she died of loneliness, of sadness over Odysseus's absence, and so a broken heart is what kills her. And imagine Odysseus's just heartbreak in learning that that's how his mother died. So the shades are able to speak to Odysseus by drinking the blood of the sacrifice. So he has to fend off a lot of the ghosts until he finds the ghosts that he really needs to talk to. And then we have this really interesting collection of conversations that Odysseus gets to have with all of these dead heroes, some of whom he knew were dead and some of whom he did not know. So he speaks to Agamemnon, to Achilles and Ajax, to Titius and Sisyphus, that's Sisyphus, who has a really, really creative death punishment from the gods, and then to Hercules. So look to see what kind of messages each of these different heroes gives to Odysseus, what they tell him about life, if they give him advice, and any other notable points of their conversations. Ultimately, however, Odysseus's goal, just like Circe told him, is to speak to Tiresias, the blind prophet from Thebes. So it's interesting that he's blind because physical blindness is usually associated with like supernatural sight. So the idea of being able to see or see is a very common motif in literature. So part of Tiresias's credibility as a prophet is from the fact that he is blind. And he gives Odysseus a list of warnings and of prophecies that cover not only his journey home, but then things that he should do when he gets there. So as you read this section, you need to make a list of the elements that Tiresias warns him about and the prophecies that he makes. All right, so track the things that Tiresias tells Odysseus to do and the things that he warns him about. From here, Odysseus and his men are able to return to Circe, where she helps them prepare for the journey, and then she takes Odysseus aside and gives him some advice. And it's very significant that she gives this advice just to Odysseus, and he does not share it with his men. So this is another thing that separates Odysseus from his men, and we can see a little bit more of their relationship here. So she warns him about 3 different stops along his journey, 3 different monsters or situations that he's going to find himself in. So the first is the sirens. Whew, you would think 3 cups of coffee was enough. But the first is the sirens. Now, the sirens are typically represented as either mermaids or harpies in paintings, but there's really no physical description of them. But they're known for seducing men with their alluring voices that captivates man's hearts. And they sit on this little island are surrounded by rotting corpses of the men who they've drawn to them with their voices. And so she recommends that Odysseus plug his men's ears with beeswax so that they cannot hear the songs. And she says, if you want to listen to the song of the sirens, have them lash you to the mast. So that's number 1. The next is she tells him about the options between Scylla and Charybdis. That's how you say that name. So between Scylla and Charybdis, one is these big crashing waves in like maelstrom whirlpool that goes off 3 times a day, and only one ship has ever survived the maelstrom, and that is the monster Charybdis, who's like underneath the ocean creating that whirlpool each day. The other option is Scylla, who is this 6-headed, 12-tentacled monster with this like scary high puppy cry. And after they sail past the sirens, the path becomes so narrow that Odysseus needs to choose whether to hug the coast on the side of Charybdis or the coast on the side of Scylla. You can't get through the middle. There's just not enough room. And so Circe recommends that Odysseus choose Scylla's side because it is better to lose 6 men than to lose everyone in that whirlpool. And so ultimately Odysseus listens to her advice. But again, he doesn't tell his men what is coming. He doesn't tell them that he's choosing the 6 over all of them. So that's something else that he keeps from them. So after that, Circe warns him about the island of Thrinacia. So this is where all of the cattle of the sun god Helios live. They graze, they sit around and do cow stuff, but they never die. Okay, if you leave them untouched, they're immortal. And so she tells him not to touch the cattle, not to interfere with them. If you leave them alone, you will get home safely. You will get home alive. So these are the warnings that she gives Odysseus before he departs with his men. So Odysseus and his men take their journey. They sail past the sirens, and you can see here they're really depicted as harpies. They have the heads of women and the bodies of birds, but they're also depicted as mermaids. And you can see Odysseus here is lashed to the mast, and his men are rowing as fast as they can before they succumb to the song of the sirens. So they've passed the sirens, and then they're faced here. We can see their little boat with going between Charybdis's whirlpool on the one side that sucks down and destroys the entire ship, or Scylla here on the right with her 6 heads, 1 man for each head, slurps them down her gullet. And so Odysseus and his men sail past Scylla. 6 men are quickly chomped up, but then the rest of them go on their way. So Circe's advice and Tiresias's warnings are benefiting Odysseus, if not Odysseus's men. So let's catch up here on our map. We have followed Odysseus from preparations with Circe, past the Sirens, past Scylla and Charybdis, and now we're here on the island of Thrinacia with the cattle of the sun god. And if you were Odysseus, wouldn't you just be thinking, if this island is such a big deal, I'm not going to land on it. I'm not even going to tempt myself. I'm not going to tempt my men. I'm just not even going to land on that island. I should stay away from that island. That's what I would be thinking. But Odysseus allows himself to be convinced by his men to stop at this island. So Odysseus and his men survive through Scylla and Charybdis, and they come to the island of Lord Helios. So use these questions to guide your understanding as you read through this section of the text. So look at why do they land on the island of Helios? Why not avoid it altogether? How long are they there? And why don't they leave? More importantly, what keeps them there? It's important for us to remember that Odysseus is recounting his version of events. He is telling us what happened on the island. So we're not hearing from his men or from their side of things. But one of the important motifs in the story comes up with Eurylochus giving a speech to the men about eating the cattle. We can see how persuasive he is, the reasoning and the emotions that he uses to convince the men to do what he wants. So think about what Odysseus tells us about where he is when the men get into trouble. And then the consequence of that is what Lord Helios threatens to do. What does he tell Zeus he will do unless he interferes? So we see all of this unfold, and we see finally the death of everyone except for Odysseus. Everyone is shipwrecked, the prophecies come true, and Odysseus on his own washes up to the shores of Calypso's island. And so this takes us back to where the story began, to where Odysseus picked up in book 5 and was recounting his story to the Phaeacians. So he comes to the end of his tale, and we return to our frame story with Odysseus in the court of King Alcinous. So with this return of his story, he's talked for 5, 6, or 7 books. So with this return to the story, Odysseus has caught us up, and we're going to follow him home. All right, if you'll see here, he's in Phaeacia, so he's almost there. He's almost to his home of Ithaca. So for the rest of these books, you guys are going to have some questions just in the packet that do not require a video. So good luck. See me if you have any questions about the reading. And we're going to watch Odysseus come closer and closer to this homecoming here at the end. And remember the structure of our hero's journey. He is getting home, but there are a few things still in his way. So consider the stages, where you think he is in that cycle, and what you expect to happen as he comes closer and closer back to the end of the story.